I'm working on a historical sociological novel based on the life of the Ottoman scholar Abubkr Effendi. Now, there are many books and works out on the life of this scholar. However, very little is known of his early life, from birth to, I would say, age 30, there's absolutely nothing available. I've been to Turkey, where I've spoken to the Vice Chancellor of Sultan Fatih Mehmet University, who had a student do a PhD on this Ottoman scholar's life, as well as a student who did a master's at the University of Cape Town on his life. Abubkr Effendi arrived in South Africa in the year 1862 and left important works, including early text in Arabic, in Afrikaans, written in Arabic script. So we learn a lot from this scholar in terms of linguistic contributions of the post 1850s Afrikaans language in South Africa, as well as Islamic theological interpretations of the religion of Islam at the Cape during that period. However, I could find very little on his early life, where he was born, how he spent his early period, etc. I had the good fortune of ending up in Kurdistan, in the city of Erbil, in northern Iraq, as Dean of the University of Kurdistan, which gave me access to do research on the scholar's early life, since he was born in that city and he had generations before him from that city. So 3 years in northern Iraq gave me the opportunity to dig into archives, move around the geography, visit some of the lands and the places where the Ottoman Empire had afforded them funds to build their own madrasas, of which Abu Bakr's father was a mullah. The term mullah is used here instead of mullah or maulana, as in South Asian context. So he was a mullah Omar, with the title of Beg, not related immediately to my surname linguistically, but certainly a relative of mine. And his father was a Beg, Mullah Mustafa Beg, and the title before that, Bapir, then eventually Effendi. So Abu Bakr gets the title of Effendi after the demise of his father, and when he becomes a prominent scholar within the Ottoman Empire. He is, of course, sent to South Africa. The scholars and people at the Cape requested the Ottoman Empire to ask Queen Victoria at the time to send a learned alim to South Africa to settle disputes, etc. That story is well known. Abu Bakr is then chosen to come to South Africa. So after 3 years of research, I was not exactly able to get the detail that I wanted. Hence, I decided to write this historical sociological novel. Like a historical novel, except that in this case, I have the luxury of having learned some of the Kurdish language, also the culture, etc., and decided to write this book through the eyes, almost, a biography of Abubkr Effendi from the time, his early period, time he's born, his early life. My hope here is to contribute towards an understanding of the Kurdish people during the 1800s, the tribal clan lifestyles, some of the cultural nuances within that society, and contribute to a broader understanding of Abubkr Effendi before he and his family moves to Erzurum in eastern Anatolia region of Turkey, what is today Turkey. Historically, of course, those lands all belong to the Ottoman Empire, so part of the Ottoman wilayas, part of the Ottoman lands. There was no Turkey as we know it today. There was no Iraq as we know it today. Of course, we know this in history. There was no Egypt in the sense that Egypt was controlled as a single national identity. There was no Lebanon. There was no Jordan. There was no Iraq. Hence, Abu Bakr lives in a world that we today call the Darul Islam, the land of the Muslims. And he leaves that region after his father is killed in the tribal fight with Agas of the region. And my job then now in this book is to contribute towards an understanding of his early life, which I will add to his life that I'm researching in Turkey, and from Turkey, South Africa, where he eventually dies. So what I'm going to do today is read the first chapter of my book. I entitled it, so title a work in progress and certainly a working title. I call it Zarathustra Meets Muhammad. Now, I decided on this title because the region Erbil is said to be the oldest city on earth, and I was lucky enough to visit some of the early religious forms in that region, including Christianity, early forms of Christianity, and religions that predates Christianity. For example, where John the Baptist is accepted as the prophet, the Yazidis, and of course Zoroastrianism, Zardasht or Zarathustra, the prophet of Zoroastrianism, and then later on Islam, forms of Islam, a region rich in religious diversity. What struck me was the cultural influences of pre-Islamic peoples on the religion of Islam. This is nothing new. We know, of course, that no religion develops in isolation, that it takes on cultural nuances from people before, in its environment, etc. Hence the title Zarathustra Meets Muhammad. So I start my first chapter and I call it Imagined Identities, I guess after Benedict Anderson's investigation. I was born during the reign of the Ottoman Sultan Mahmud II during the first quarter of the 19th century. My father named me Abu Bakr after the famous Rashidun Khalif. My people, the Kurds of the plains of Hawler, were Muslim, Khoshnau and Usmanli. When I think back, we were always Muslim first, Khoshnau second, and as was the case with most of the people of the Middle East, we were Ottomans or Usmanli. My father, Mullah Umar Beg, like his father, Mullah Mustafa Beg, and his grandfather before, Maulana Sulaiman Bapir, were mullahs. They taught in the madrasas built by our great ancestors. And as destiny would have it, I would follow in the tradition of my family. That I would become the Grand Mufti of Shahrazur was not a goal that I set for myself as a young man focused on learning the laws and rights of Islam. I was happy enough to teach in the madrasas of my forefathers in Harir and Shaklawa. We were never paid a salary for our efforts. The self-knowledge that we would be rewarded with Jannah or heaven for our investments we accepted to be significantly more than the coins used in the souks around Harir. I was gifted with the ability to understand exactly who I was. Knowledge was to be my lifelong pursuit. I was never satiated and always looked forward to the next lesson that my father and uncles would deliver. They already knew then that I would eventually leave the madrasa to acquire more knowledge in the famous madrasas of Baghdad, Medina, and Mecca. There were no poor people in my village. We all lived in very similar mud houses. We had very little furnishings in our homes. We didn't need those. We sat on the floors like our Prophet did, and we slept on reed mats. We were never hungry, as the region was abundant in vegetation and the goats and geese were always well fed. We loved the tea that we harvested from the surrounding chai bush around the mountain slopes, and our mothers took pride in presenting these to the visitors who would frequent our home. Our house was rather busy, as my father, Mullah Umar, as he was lovingly known, was not only the local alim, but also gifted in dealing with the ability to expel the occasional jinn that would infest the human vessels of our region. I learned the ritual of ridding the body of these malicious spirits from my father. These jinns or spirits had the habit of traveling in colonies and would more often than not live as an entire colony within one person's body. The more of them in one body, the more difficult it is to rid the host of these spiritual pests. I will tell you more about this later. I had only a few friends and preferred spending time with my brother and his children. My favorite in the family was my brother's son, Umar Lutfi. I loved this boy as if he was my own son. He would sit on my lap and listen to my recitations of the Quran without making a sound. You could tell he was mesmerized by the poetic sounds. It was as if he went into a trance-like state whenever the whisperings of Allah became audible. It was as if his soul danced in another realm of existence when Allah's music played. In many ways, I was envious of his ability to operate in his world. His peace was displayed through his piercing blue eyes. What was certain to all of us who knew Umar Lutfi was that he would never be in need of anything in this life. It was as if he was only borrowed to us mortals on earth. We accepted him. We had no choice. Lutfi's mere presence convinced you. My mother Amina was ethnically Iraqi Turkoman. We refer to her as Daya. She traced her family's migration to the region back to the 11th century, when a second wave of Turkoman entered northern Iraq from Isfahan. Her forefathers were part of the great Seljuk Empire. In an uncanny twist of fate, I was affiliated to the founding fathers of the madrasa system through Daya's lineage. Daya would always tell us stories of a great forefather, the scholar Abu Hamid. We would sit in awe listening to the stories of this great mystic. Daya would beam with pride when she explained how Abu Hamid was able to memorize book after only reading it once. His ability became known across the Middle East. He was so famous that the wazir at the time declared whatever Abu Hamid said to be the finality on the subject in Islam. Daya would remind us that whatever we learnt in the madrasa had the designs of Abu Hamid on it. Out of love and respect, we showed deference to her stories, but did not always believe her. On one occasion, noticing our skepticism, Daya produced a book written by Abu Hamid called Ihya Ulumuddin, and challenged that no scholar in all of the Ottoman Muslim wilayas would be able to produce a text as great as this. She muttered that only the Quran was more significant, as she carefully packed it away. By the 19th century, the Turkoman of northern Iraq had assimilated into the culture of the mostly Sunni Kurds of the region. What had me thinking as a young boy was the constant connection that Daya made to her Turkoman roots. Why would Daya hold on to her ethnic roots of more than 600 years, having truth be told, no linguistic or memory of the ancient Turkoman of Isfahan? I knew that Baba, this is how we lovingly referred to our father Mullah Umar, was very proud of his Khoshnau roots and spoke about it all the time. Maybe it is because identity surfaces when we are constantly faced by the identity of another. This must be the case between Daya and Baba, I thought, and left it at that. There were many Turkoman in our village that gathered regularly in the souk where they enjoyed the offerings of the chai bush while smoking the buds of the poppy plant that grew wild along the banks of Lake Dukan. These men, I knew of no women that smoked this herb, certainly not in public, seemed to have made a career out of this ritual. Baba insisted that they hang out only because they are very close friends. I always thought that it had to be more than just filial piety, and that it had to be the chai bush or the poppy buds. Either way, they never drank chai bush without smoking the poppy buds. These two always went together. Chai bush was available in our house, but Daya insisted that none of Baba's friends were allowed to bring the poppy buds home. I would have to wait for an opportunity to try that, I thought. I knew of at least 5 of my classmates that were already enjoying chai bush while smoking poppy buds as regularly as the Turkoman. I always believed that the reason why the Turkoman were able to maintain a distinct identity was due to the millet system imposed by the Usmanli administration. Many different tribes surrounded us across the plains of Hauler. These millets offered minority religious groups the opportunity to practice their traditions amongst each other. In Erbil, the millet of Beth Amka was established by the minority Chaldeans, Christians, Assyrians, and Kakai. Around our area in Sisawa, Shaklawa, and Arir, there were no millets. However, we had many villages where people with different identities tended to group together, mostly along tribal lines. Here the Turkoman, Christians, and Chaldeans tended to live in separate villages. My family belonged to the tribe called Khoshnau. We had hundreds of tribes living in the area of the Hauleri Plains. I personally knew at least one member from these many tribes belonging to the Barzani, Marzuri, Argoshi, Barwari, Sherwani, and Akrawi, to mention but a few. It was clear to me that the Turkoman people formed their own identity along tribal lines and maintained their identity for more than 600 years because of the tribal structure innate in our society. To us, the tribal identity often transcended the primacy of religious identity, as our Khoshnau tribe had both Muslim and Christian Khoshnau. This was not difficult for me to understand, as for as long as I can remember, or even my grandfather in his tales, we Khoshnau have lived on the plains of Hauler amongst people of many different religious persuasions. We respected them as Ahl al-Kitab, and our mullahs regularly reminded us that the Prophet of Islam treated the Ahl al-Kitab with dignity and respect. We were always committed to continue along this sunnah. In our world, wealth was determined by the size of your landholding. As a prominent family in this part of the Ottoman Wilaya, we had in our possession lands that stretched as far as the human eye could see. This ownership, along with my father's position as mullah, placed my family in a much esteemed position in our stratified world. However, my father was a humble man that never thought of himself as wealthier than his neighbors and continued to live by the Islamic saying that those of you who display arrogance, even if only as small as the size of a mustard seed, will not enter the gates of heaven. My father was totally committed to his faith and very well aware of this promise from Allah. I will read chapter 2 if enough of you are interested. So you like my page, this posting, and then I'll decide if I send another one out. Thank you.